Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Lady Chair. Firstly, I want to point out to you two things generally that this team so far have raised that I want you to really bear in mind. Firstly, there's this absurd proposal that somehow if you've got a low mental age, we drug you up and try and correct you and change your mental state. That simply isn't true. We don't see necessarily that just because you're not very clever, you're somehow mentally ill and somehow need to be changed and treated. I'd like you to bear that in mind. Secondly, also, I want you to bear this in mind. If you've been institutionalised, is it really that likely that you're going to be going around rampantly having sex with people all the time? As we said, as Tony said, if you're under observation, it's very unlikely that that's going to be the case. And also, where are these people, these potential partners, going to be coming from anyway? Quickly to pick up on something Jeff said, he started out by arguing from authority, some guy he knew that did this. Well, I just started to completely discount that. Everyone knows about philosophy knows that an argument for authority is completely unpersuasive. And for every example, one way, there's one the other, so that just doesn't work. Now, I've got 3 points to talk to you about this evening. These firstly are the economics of the system, secondly how we treat mental illness, and thirdly an idea about social engineering, which I think is really important. Well, first we told you it's a tiny proportion of these people who they pointed out, people of low mental age. It's not very many people that this is even going to apply to anyway. It's such a proposal is going to have a hugely high cost of getting everyone to take some sort of contraceptive. No thanks. They haven't taken that into account. And why does the system work? Now Jeff and James have told you that it's really, really expensive having all these people up for adoption. Well, no, it isn't. The private sector bear the cost of adoption. Who adopts people? Parents adopt people. That is not the state funding it. That is the private sector, parents coming in and taking over, no thank you, an economic burden from the state. So as we see it, we actually think that the economics are much better as they are already anyway. Now secondly, treating mental illness, no thank you, sit down. Well, mental illness per se is not genetic, it's not going to get passed on necessarily. And certainly low mental age is not genetic either. People who have, no thank you, highly intelligent people can give birth to people of low mental age. People of low mental age can give birth to highly intelligent people, no thank you. Now, also, the idea of how we treat mental illness. There's a difference between medicating to alleviate, even if we accept that we should medicate people of low mental age, medicating to alleviate symptoms or people who are mentally ill, and medicating for an end, medicating to bring something about, medicating to change something. That's basically putting government policy and an end the government want to achieve into the way that we treat and look after people, which we simply don't see as right. We see that medicating and looking after those people in society is only to be done to the end of alleviating their problems. And lastly, I want to move on to talk about social engineering. Well, if we accept, if the example stands, which we've already suggested it doesn't, that somehow people who are ill or who have low mental age should be got rid of out of society, and that is brought in, I want to tell you why that is a dangerous thing to do. No, thank you. That's essentially what you're doing. If you're stopping them from reproducing, you're stopping them from perpetuating mental illness. Right, no thanks. No thanks. But why is that a problem? I've already told you that it doesn't work, but now I'm going to tell you why, even if it did work, why it wouldn't be a good thing. Well, in society we celebrate diversity. Well, that's just a buzzword, but what does that really mean? Well, it means firstly that by having diversity, we have difference in society, and if you have difference, it means that you have to be tolerant, you have to be aware of differences, you have to be able to appreciate how different people no thanks, sit down. How different people work. If you eliminate difference, you eliminate the need for people to become aware of other people's differences and the need to be tolerant. Now also, on the idea of disability itself, no thank you. Society is moving towards rethinking what disability is. Indeed, you can even conceive it, in some senses, as an ability. As Tony pointed out, often people who are considered to be disabled in society might be, for instance, autistic. People who are autistic can be highly creative. No thanks. And bring about highly successful things. So even if the proposition is successful, reducing the difference between the different people in society isn't necessarily a good thing. So what have I told you? Firstly, that the whole idea that people who are of low mental age and under constant care are likely to be having lots of sex is simply fallacious. Secondly, that if you are of low mental age, which is the only way to define mental illness, that somehow you get drugged up, which isn't the case anyway. And lastly, and mainly because the economics of the situation as it is, we get the private sector to bear the cost of adoption is much better than the public sector doing it with long-term care. Secondly, because treating mental illness shouldn't be done to bring about a change in that person, it should only be done to alleviate the symptoms. And lastly, because diversity is a good thing for society, I'd urge you to oppose this proposition.
Yeah. Exactly. I thank the speaker for his time.